I think I've been an aspiring writer for about 50 years and just never given myself permission to really do that. Somehow making a living was more of a priority for most of my life. But I finally got to a point in my career where I was ready to say, I've accomplished what I wanted to, and now it's my turn to have some fun and be challenged in a very different way. So I'm going to try writing. And it is a very humbling experience. The nice thing about it is I feel like I have nowhere to go but up. I actually, in my job, I had to do a lot of writing because as a kind of a senior executive in healthcare, there were just a lot of reports that needed to be written and white papers and things like that. But in terms of really allocating most of my time, virtually all of my time to writing and working on books, it's been about 5 years. And during that time, I have I've published 4 books and we'll have a 5th coming out shortly. That's a really good question, and it depends on whether or not I go with the traditional publishing route or whether or not with an indie publishing route. So I've done both, and there are pros and cons to each one, and I'm still weighing that in my mind, and we'll also see how agents respond to the 3rd book. I think that there are lots of different ways to publish a book, but basically, the 2 most popular are the traditional, where one goes either through an agent to a publisher or sometimes to a publisher directly. And, the publisher basically handles the entire process from production through marketing. Although I think marketing, unless you're a known writer, is not an investment a lot of publishers are willing to make. On the other hand, self-publishing is where you either contract with a small publishing house to put your book out, or you use a service such as services available through Amazon, like CreateSpace, and they handle basically all of the aspects, the mechanical production of your book, and also make it available on certain sites like Amazon or Barnes & Noble, etc. And I've used the indie publishing for my thrillers. I can tell you that the competition in self-publishing or indie publishing and in categories like thrillers is immense. And it's very hard to create visibility for your brand. You've got to be far more skilled at social media than I am. So it's kind of an uphill battle building a brand on one's own. My advice to any writer is the key to all of this is perseverance. I mean, we all struggle. Our work can always be better. Our ability to market ourselves or be marketed is an ongoing challenge. And therefore, I think the people that succeed in this are the people that have, fortitude and grit and just don't give up. They just keep, pursuing it and honing their skills and getting their name out and building a brand. It is difficult because, a lot of us fashion ourselves as writers. And when I first started publishing, or my first books were published, people would come up to me and say, "Oh, I've got a book that I'm planning to write," or I can't tell you how many times I hear that. I'm planning to write a book. Okay, when? And it's not as easy nor as glamorous as it sounds. It's a lot of hard work. People that write are kind of compelled to write. It's almost not really a choice. This is just something I'm called to do. Yeah, it's pretty much like that. It's sort of it's just something that I'm drawn to. It's like when I'm really time stops and I'm able to just get completely lost in the writing for 5 or 6 hours. And sometimes it's very good, and sometimes at the end of 5 or 6 hours, I read back over it and go, what was I thinking? I think that notion of getting lost in something is an important one, and I think it tells one a great deal, because it's there was a concept articulated years ago by a very famous psychologist, and it's called flow. And the idea is that when you're in flow, you are lost, you're absorbed, and it's not necessarily pleasurable. It's just that time is suspended and you're very much caught up in exactly what you're doing. And I kind of relish those times because usually they are very productive. I mean, I end up at the end of the day with something that's good. I write anywhere that my cat doesn't bother me. Working from home is a mixed blessing, and I think anyone who works from home will tell you that, because it's either interruptions by pets or the thought of, gee, I've got the laundry to do, or just, the daily tasks of life. But normally I sit at the desk as I am now, and it's very familiar and it's very comfortable, and I kind of close out the world, and it's sort of my sacred space. As to whether or not I can write anywhere, yes. Once I get used to it, and I've learned also to sort of just tune out distractions. I just don't hear them anymore. I mean, there are times when the UPS man comes and rings the doorbell, and I'm kind of oblivious to it because I'm caught up in the writing. Yeah, I think you need to feel safe. You need to feel comfortable, and you need to feel that you can just sort of pour yourself into your writing and not be distracted, and kind of emerge from your cave at an appropriate time. It's a lot of writers, and then I procrastinate as much as I can. So I sit down at my desk and I think of all the things I need or could do other than writing. And it could be making the grocery shopping list. It could be things that are absolutely trivial, but they're distractions. So for me, the challenge is to kind of mentally shove that to the side and say, no, I've got work to do. I really do. This is my work, and I'm called to do it now. Well, the first thing that I do is turn off my internet connection, because that's the most powerful distraction there is. And if I hear the little ding telling me I've got email, even though it's probably a solicitation, I get distracted. So I start with that. And I think, for me, it sounds trite, but kind of a clean desk is sort of a clean mind. I mean, if I don't have stacks of paper surrounding me, I feel better. It's just easier for me to concentrate. But other than that, in terms of rituals, no. When I first started, I used to sit and I would meditate for about 15 or 20 minutes, and it was actually a good practice. I don't know why I got out of it. I should get back into it because it put me in a very relaxed and kind of creative mindset. In terms of kind of books that have been helpful to me, Stephen King's autobiography was wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and just listening to his journey. And it's not that I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I think he's a great writer, but it's just he writes in a genre, horror, that doesn't really appeal to me. But it doesn't mean I can't have tremendous respect and admiration for what he's accomplished. And again, when one reads his autobiography, realize it's not been a straight path to success. It's had a lot of bumps along the way. Annie Dillard's book on writing is phenomenal. And again, extraordinarily accomplished writer, and talks about how difficult the process is. So I think when you read the autobiographies of writers, it's helpful in the sense that you realize that even the best struggle and have struggled profoundly. And I think that's an important message for young aspiring writers, is that this isn't easy. It's extremely tough. And the best have made it because they have the grit or perseverance to hang in there and continue to write every day. And the other thing that I found interesting was there was a video course called Masterclass with James Patterson. And he's a prolific writer. And, again, I found it helpful just to listen to him talk in a very humble way about what his path has been like. Well, you hear almost every writer say you should set a minimum number of words you're going to write every day and just stick to it. And some days the words are profound and some days they're not, but you adhere to that. Thank goodness it's not a problem that I've struggled with. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't days or weeks where I'm not having a tough time disciplining myself to write, or the developing a twist in the plot is difficult for me. I mean, what I've not suffered is that kind of agonizing sense of I just can't pick up my pen and write or sit at my keyboard. It's extraordinarily common, and I have close friends who are writers who struggle with it profoundly. It's maybe it's that my standards are lower, and I'm just willing to, kind of push through stuff regardless of how it impacts the quality. That lesson years ago. I studied very, very traditional martial arts, and there were many, many people in school that had a lot more natural talent than I did. And I envied them at first, and it was like, gosh, these people get it, and I don't. I felt really uncoordinated. But now, I guess it's been more than 40 years later, I'm still doing it, and it's amazing how that perseverance pays off, because the other people have fallen by the wayside. They don't practice martial arts, and I realize, what I've acquired over time. And I think, that's true of a lot of things. It takes thousands of hours to master something, and writing is no exception. And I'm putting in my time a bit late in life, but I plan to live a long life. Therefore, I hope to eventually master it. Well, I mean, there's so many elements that make a story worth telling and worth reading, and I'm not sure hierarchically how to arrange them. But of course, character development, making the character complete, human, believable, flawed, but also with perhaps with the appropriate attributes, usually positive, sometimes negative. How the character develops over time in the book, the maturation of the character, in my genre thrillers, the plot, that it's provocative, that it's believable, when technical detail is included, that it's accurate. I like to write scenarios that I know could happen, and hopefully they never will happen, but they're plausible. And I try and tell a story that makes them believable. And occasionally I'll have a reader say to me, for instance, I had a reader in New York say to me, "I'm not sure that I can sleep anymore at night after reading your book because it was a terrorism plot that unfolds in New York." That's a bit extreme, but she took it to heart. So I think there are a lot of elements that go into a good book. But I put myself in the place of the reader and say, is this something that the reader's going to relate to? Will they believe this? Or how are they going to feel about this character? And if I'm writing a series, as I am completing the trilogy, the empathy with the character becomes incredibly important. So those are the primary elements. I think the other thing is setting. And I have an aunt who constantly chastises me for writing about places I've never been. And I said, well, thank goodness for the internet, thank goodness for Google, because I can picture it perfectly now. So if I'm writing about a scene in Pakistan, a street scene in Islamabad, I'm going to research that as much as I possibly can, so that I feel like I'm actually there at the moment that I'm writing it. And I love it again when readers come up to me and they say, how long did you live in Pakistan? I do as much research for a fiction book as I do for a nonfiction book. So, For instance, when I wrote After You Hear It's Cancer, which was a guide for navigating the journey through cancer, and a very tough topic, I did months of research, and there are hundreds and hundreds of endnotes in that. I do comparable research when I'm writing a piece of fiction. So there are endnotes, but I want to make sure that everything again is accurate, it's believable. And if I'm talking about a type of weapon that is being used, then I'm going to understand that weapon extremely well and be able to discuss it. I can tell you that it reads much more like a story out of the Jerusalem Post than it does a piece of fiction. Obviously, it's set in Israel, It's, I think, highly believable and based on current and past events. And it's provocative because it raises some very powerful ethical questions about how far a nation should go in protecting itself. About as much as I can tell you.